Okay, so I'm back for segment three, our final segment, with Louisa Joel, who is the founder and president of the Positive Psychology Association of Canada. Have I got that right?
Yes, yes.
Perfect, good. Okay, so let's just go to this phrase that Stanford threw out, which inspired me to want to talk to you a little bit, using happiness to optimize longevity. And they didn't really spell that out, but we talked about this earlier in the first segment. So when you hear that phrase, what do you think that really means? And connecting that to word longevity, living a longer, happier life. Well, how does that mean to you?
Well, there are different factors that contribute to our well-being and happiness, and a lot of those factors also factor into longevity. So, for example, the experience of joy in our bodies and having positive emotion in our body does improve our health and well-being. If we're constantly in a negative state, then we have this cardiovascular activation. When we go into stress, and we know that stress is related to cardiovascular disease, and so the fewer times that we can have that kind of cardiac activation, then the better we're going to be in terms of our own cardiovascular health. So staying in those kinds of positive emotions, having a good way to look at situations and view situations from certain perspectives, if you can learn that over time, it will prevent the number of times you go into that stress mode, and that is definitely going to increase your longevity. We also know that being engaged in your life is important. They did a study, Ellen Langer at Harvard University did a study where she gave people, she had two different floors with older people in a retirement home. And they had, pretty well they had the same statistics in terms of their health. But for some of them, she really set up a situation where they were more engaged with their lives. They were more involved in all the decisions that they made. They were able to decide where they wanted to eat, where they wanted to see family and friends, if they wanted to watch the movie that week, etc. And she also gave them a plant. And she said, you have to water this plant. You're responsible for watering this plant. And with the other group, she actually had them kind of really disengaged. And she said, look, don't worry about anything. The people in the retirement home are really going to take care of everything for you. And she found that almost a very large percentage of people in the disengaged group died that year compared to the more engaged groups. There was a significant difference in terms of the number of deaths that had occurred.
Now, are you talking about people who were in their 70s and 80s and older? Okay.
So engagement is another really important thing. When my mother, who unfortunately passed away, she was 88, she passed away this year, but I really tried to keep her engaged. And when people gave her plants, I kept saying to her, you have to take care of these plants. It's your responsibility. You have to water it. And I gave her a water pitcher. And I said, every day you have to do this. I tried to keep her engaged in her life. That was really important for me to feel in terms of that kind of longevity. Relationships are very, very important to longevity. We know that people who have good, loving relationships live longer. It contributes to everything. Having good social interactions is very, very important to everybody's good health. Did you know that low levels of social interactivity, they did a study in the UK, low levels of social interactivity can be almost like smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think a certain level of obesity. They can kind of equate it to the two. So if you don't think that social interactivity affects your longevity and your health, you're wrong. It's a really important piece of it.
So I think what I'm hearing in between all the things we've talked about here is that mindfulness, going back to that word, is a lifelong thing you need to practice. And of course, the other word is self-awareness, which kind of comes out of that. Interestingly, just to finalize our conversation about the aging process and so on, there are a number of people who reach a certain point where the family dynamics change, and there are people who are alone. They don't have social networks. They don't have family to take care of them. And if they do, sometimes the family isn't around enough, or they don't want to be participating in things. if you could give your best piece of advice to somebody who is in their 70s and 80s, and people are living well into their 90s now, in terms of practicing mindfulness when you reach that stage, what would be the best piece of advice you would give somebody, other than what your mother's instruction about taking care of the plant, as a mindfulness practice?
Well, I think for everybody, mindfulness is really about being present. It's really about being present in the moment. So can you just be here in this moment, and you're not thinking about regrets from the past, you're also not worrying about the future, and just saying, how can I capitalize on this moment right now? So here I am speaking to Mark. How can I really be with Mark in this moment? How can I really be listening to him, care about what he has to say, respond to what he has to say? And I think that's really important. And to also be engaged. Don't let everybody take over your life or do things for you. I have a 95-year-old aunt in Sicily, and she, walks with a walker, and she's very wobbly. And I said to my cousin who takes care of her every day, I said, should she be in a wheelchair now? I mean, this is, I was concerned she was going to fall. He said, no, I want her to walk as long as possible. I want her to do as much as possible for as long as possible. So, to keep engaged with those and keep engaged in the decisions around your life, I think is really important. And I think that also creating a social network that is beyond your family is really, really important. And I can only say that also from my own personal experience. I'm going through a divorce right now. And when my husband and I separated last October, I had so many girlfriends that were there for me, that carried me through the year. And in fact, I sat down a year later and I put together a list of all of the really close girlfriends that had helped me throughout the year and really got me through the year. And it was 22 women. And I was astounded by that number. I was really shocked that there were that many women that were that close to me that had really helped me. But it also made me realize I am so grateful that I kept those good relationships. Just because we get married doesn't mean we have to throw everything else away. Or just because we get older and a spouse passes away, doesn't mean you have to stop calling all of your married friends. It's important to think, even when you're in relationships, to think beyond and say, what if something happened? Do I have other people that I can reach out to be part of my social network? Should I find myself alone again? And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, and then just to finalize on this piece, there are also surveys done constantly about women who tend to outlive men by an average of about 3 years or so, whatever the number is. And a lot of times the women are on their own later in life, or people are separating and divorcing in their 50s and 60s, and sometimes even older than that. And people think, those things only happen to people in their 40s and 50s. Well, that's not true.
No.
So all these things follow us through life cycles because life changes. Your expectations when you're in your 70s living with a partner who's been working for a long time, and all of a sudden they're around all the time. The dynamics of those relationships. So our longevity expectations, and as I like to call it, the promise of longevity, may not be the same for everybody. So you need to check in with this on a constant basis. And, in the end, you've got to have a sense of humor about things. Even if it's on the dark side, I find that's also useful. And maybe that's one of my great things is I've been fortunate. I had that happiness gene in my family because my parents were always on the bright side of things, even if it was dark.
Nice.
So that's a nice thing.
I think humor is so important. Every single day, and when I go through rough times, I prescribe half an hour of humor in my life because it really is a great way to. You're right. Sometimes you just have to laugh at life. It can be so absurd sometimes that if we can laugh a little bit, even in the absurdity, I think it's a great way to stay healthy and happy.
I think you need to take your mindfulness, positive psychology message to, actually, I'm being serious about this, to the people who work in the caregiving
Yes.
services of these retirement residences and so on, because there are a lot of issues going on in these kind of environments that are not always as happy as people make them out to be.
No, and bless them. They were, for me, when I had my mother going through what she went through before she died, I was so grateful for the love of these caregivers who really don't know her that well, and they do their job with such love and with such care. I was just amazed and comforted by that. But oftentimes when we know people and we're the caregivers, we don't take the time to take care of ourselves. And it's a very, very hard job.
Absolutely.
Very emotional. It can be 24/7. You don't know what's going to happen. And so you really have to take the time to take care of yourself and have that kind of self-care built into what you're doing, because otherwise you can burn out and get sick yourself.
Well, look, the caregiving piece is a role that women have been used to historically through different segments of life, but it continues into older age as well. And it's everybody's issue going forward. I don't think we give enough courses on how to do adequate caregiving.
No.
And this is part of the wave of the longevity economy, I think.
Well, and I think too, Mark, just on that point of caregiving is, when my mother stopped the caregiving with my father, when my father passed away, she suddenly had no purpose in life.
There
So,
you go.
if you make caregiving the only purpose of your life, then when that person goes away and you're no longer caregiving, I mean, for my mother, I know that was her demise. Once my father died, it was all downhill after that. So caregiving is very important, but you need to have other things in your life beyond the caregiving so that when that caregiving comes to an end, you still can feel engaged in your life.
Yes. One last quick question, and that is about recommended reading. If somebody wants to get more educated on positive psychology and an accessible read, what would be the number one? Because sometimes these things are too old for psychology, if there was one book that would be useful to people at any life stage, what would that book be?
Well, I would say that anything that is written by the founding father of positive psychology, which is Martin Seligman, and he's written several books. His one of his oldest books is Learned Optimism, Authentic Happiness, but his most recent book is called Flourish, which is, again, they're all consumable by the general public. Flourish will give you sort of an update. And then since then, there's been hundreds and hundreds of books written by positive psychologists on the topic of positive psychology. But if you just Google, and if you go to the Canadian Positive Psychology Association website, cppa.ca, you'll actually find resources there as well on different books that you can read. And lots to read on positive. Even if you Google positive psychology, you'll get lots of books.
Oh, boy, don't take us on the Google train. At any rate, listen, Louisa, I really want to thank you for spending the time with me to talk about the connection with using happiness and longevity. And let's see who wins those contests with these products and services and how that plugs into the happiness theme.
Yeah,
I have a good mind to actually send an email to Stanford and say, describe what you meant by that phrase.
Yeah,
So we'll
send them the interview.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We're giving them a plug. But I think it's great because technology is an important piece of this, and design around environments for people as we age, because we have to put we in there because we're all in that same direction. Anyway, again, thanks, Louisa, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.